This is pretty much the worst video ever made.
To be here with you together, be a part of this stuff. Now, sometimes when you go to church, especially those of you who are here for the first time, you're kind of going, I don't know what to do with this whole thing. So I want you to know something. Sometimes when you go to church, it's a group of people that are like, they're us people. They're like, listen, we're not really open to outsiders. Us four, no more, that kind of thing. And so like, we got this thing, and you feel like you're an outsider to there. And then sometimes you go to church and you walk in and you're like, they're all about those people, They're like, well, those people are the ones, you don't want to go over there. And those people. So sometimes it's an us people thing, and sometimes it's a those people thing. Those people that act like there's those people, which I just did. So anyways, but we as church, I want you to know something about us a little bit unique. We're a me too kind of place, right? We're not an us people place. We're not a those people place. We're a me too place. What I mean by that is that you've gone through some mess in your life. Yeah, me too. You got some regrets, some parts of your life that you'd like to change or do over or delete, just erase and forget ever happened. Me too. We all have some places in our story that we wish we could do over, delete, and just kind of move past. And that's our story. That's what we do as a church. So if you're here for the first time, I know you got some questions about this group of people. This is not a group of people that used to be people like you. We're not a group of people who tolerate people like you, and we're not a group of people who try to change or fix people like you. We're just a group of people like you trying to figure out how to take our next step toward Jesus. So this essentially is a church for people who don't like to go to church. So, and I say that to people. One time I said, we really created a church for people who don't like to go to church, and the guy goes like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I said, yeah, like me, I really don't like to go to church. And he's like, well, who's the pastor? I'm like, me, I am. I just don't like it a ton, because it's kind of boring sometimes, and church should be the most amazing place ever, because the truth is we have the best story ever told. It should be a sin for this stuff to be lame, right? And so it's really amazing stuff. And even when we're doing a series like this one, if you've not been to church in a while, or you come to church, or you've been part of church and you're here to visit, like, doing a series called This Series Sucks is a little different, right? I mean, we had one of the families in our church had to sit their kids down and go, listen, you're still not allowed to say sucks at home. You're only allowed to say sucks at church, which is a little backwards. I get it. Like usually they're saying, look, you can't say that at church. We talk like that at home, but we don't take all that stuff to church with us. That's usually how it goes, but this is a different place. So anyways, I'm thrilled you're here, be a part of this. We've been talking through for the past several weeks stuff in life that just sucks sometimes. There are some things in life that you're going to go through, that you've been through, that I'm going through, that we've been through or going through, that just sucks. There's no other way to express it. Like, for instance, we opened this series up with a sermon or talk we call Cancer Sucks. And I think we can all agree cancer sucks. And that if you've gone through it and you know somebody who's gone through it, man, it's terrible to go through it. We talked the next week about depression, anxiety. Depression, anxiety suck. I've been through it. It's terrible. I've watched people I love go through it. I've watched your lives, many of your lives, as you've worked through the issues related to depression and anxiety. It sucks. It's terrible. We talked about bullying. Okay, yes, we talked about bullying last week. No, we're not all middle schoolers. No, we're not all dealing with the playground bully. But we talked through some of my own story. I'm still healing from lots of that pieces of it. But the truth is that we all struggle in life with being bullied. Maybe it's not the playground kid who wants to meet you by the bike rack, or the guy, or the girl on the bus who beats you up. I get it. Okay, right? Like, just watch it online, you'll understand. So, but like maybe that's not your story, but you've been bullied by life. Sometimes it just seems like one circumstance after another just seems to roll over you, and you don't know how to deal with it. Maybe it's a boss or somebody at work or some guy or some person who just treats you poorly. And maybe it's a relationship. You're just being bullied by it. And so talking through what does it mean to stand up? How do you do this? What's the real way that we can actually find a solution? Because bullying sucks. The truth is that there are a lot of things in life that just suck, and one of them that we're talking about today is betrayal. If you've ever been betrayed by someone, you've invested, that's what betrayal is really this investment of trust or confidence in someone. You give them trust or confidence, and they utilize or leverage your trust or confidence against you, and it hurts you. If you've ever had that happen to you, you know that it sucks. It's a terrible thing to go through when a person or a boss or somebody leverages what they could use to help serve and what it could use to help propel you forward. They leverage it and it hurts you. That's a terrible thing to go through. And even if you've not been by name been betrayed, you know that it's terrible to go through life with disappointments and deep, truthful heartache when someone takes what you've given them, what you've trusted them with, and leverages it in a way to cause you deep pain. That's terrible. And it's terrible when it happens in a relationship. It's terrible when it happens at work. It's even worse, I think, in some ways when it happens inside of the church. The church can be a terribly damaging place, a terribly difficult place to deal with, because we constantly put our trust in people and we're like, oh, they're good Christian people. They won't hurt me. And then they do. You don't believe me? Be a pastor for 25 years. It's terrible sometimes when we deal with some of the things that people do, even in the name of Jesus. So no matter what your hurt is, no matter where you've been, we've all been betrayed at some point, and it's been deeply painful. So I was looking through scripture, I'm like, where can we talk about betrayal? And man, you can hardly turn a page in the Bible without seeing somebody betraying somebody betrayal, being betrayed, something like that. Man, it's pretty amazing stuff as you go through it. You get back all the way up to Genesis chapter 2, and you begin to see the inner workings of betrayal. When God says, hey, I want to trust you with this huge creation. I've invested it in you, and we leverage it and wind up hurting God with it. We didn't mean to. That wasn't our intent. We just leveraged it that way, and God was betrayed in the process. And it goes on from there, page after page, story after story. We see this unfolding of stuff that just, it sucks to go through. And every single person who's been betrayed through the pages of Scripture and through the chairs you're sitting in today, every single one of them would agree with us. Maybe they'd use a different word, but they would say that it sucked to go through because it's terrible to be betrayed. But how do we deal with it? How is it that you and I kind of find hope? Where do we get out of it? How do we move through it? Because it feels like a life sentence, doesn't it? When you're going through betrayal, when somebody does something that disappoints you, maybe you trusted them to do something and then you realize that they took it too far. You said, hey, we're going to set this limit on something, and they blew that out of the way. Or you said, hey, this is going to be the case. We're kind of operated and we're going to allow drinking maybe to be this part of our life. And then all of a sudden it just gets a hold and there's just this huge difference and life's falling apart and things just haven't gone well. And you're like, man, I just feel like they just abandoned me, Or there's been some expression of how it feels to go through life. You invest one thing, you wind up with another, and you get hurt in the process. How is it that we can find hope and healing in kind of that mess? Now, David expresses that. Now, this is what I love about David's story. We talked about David last week, David and Goliath and little kid and the big giant and all this stuff. I mean, if you're not familiar with the story, Saul was kind of chosen as king because he was bigger than everybody. So they looked to him as king, but he didn't have what it took. David comes onto the scene. He steps up and he defeats Goliath. We talked about last week when we talked about bullying. And so he defeats Goliath. He winds up standing. I mean, it's a pretty cool thing. He cuts off Goliath's head. He holds up Goliath's head and shows it around everybody. And everybody's like, David, man, this guy's got it. It's a pretty big deal, right? He's everything. And then there comes this following of David where people are going, well, Saul has slain his thousands, but David has slain his 10,000s or tens of thousands. And it's this big following. And eventually Saul falls away as king. David takes up as king. And then as a part of this process, he winds up with a whole lot of wives and concubines and all this stuff. And it's pretty crazy stuff that doesn't make any sense in our culture. And to be honest with you, I kind of struggle sorting it out sometimes. But he has lots of kids, lots of different wives and concubines, which on the surface, when you read that, you're like, that's the life, But then when you start thinking about it, it's hard to keep one woman happy, let alone 2 or 200. I can't even imagine it. So we gotta kind of put it in context. And so he gets his third kid, his third son, is named Absalom. And Absalom is a good-looking dude. The Bible, 2 Chronicles says that he's the best-looking guy. Some of our one of my daughters just looked like this. She was down looking at her phone or something, and they went like this. Huh? Did you say good-looking dude? Okay. Did I hear you say that? So, he's the guy that everybody's like, oh, he's the guy. He's like Scott Holloway. He's just a pretty boy. That's all there is to it. He knew I was going to say that, too. But yesterday, here's the new one. Yesterday, I was in here with Michaela, and Michaela and I were putting the baptistry up, and we were getting some stuff, carrying some stuff in, and Bryce was practicing his saxophone, and he he was leaning up against the wall over there with his foot up like this, playing the saxophone. And Michaela goes, he doesn't even just sound cool. Look at him. He just looks cool over there, you know? With his long beard and playing. I'm like, man, everybody wants to be him. So anyways, but I wish I could play something. Like I can play music like radio and stuff like that. But it's amazing. Like he's the guy everybody wants to be. Absalom has got it all together. Now, he could use this for a good thing, right? But he doesn't. He's an entitled kid. Anybody, you don't have to raise your hand, know an entitled kid? Okay. Like a kid who thinks he's got it all together, and he, instead of using it to invest in the good of the kingdom, instead of using it to serve his father who cares for him, instead of doing all that, he uses it for his own good and betrays his dad. Now that's bad, right? I mean, that's a bad deal. But he's got a lot of kids, a lot of different places, and maybe that didn't hurt David as much, but there was a big hurt that followed that. Now, you got to imagine, Absalom has some people around him. Some people are like, hey, I could get something out of following Absalom. If I stick with Absalom, he's got some resources, you know. I get some personal gain if I hang out with Absalom. So he got some people that way. He got some gain because he had influence, right? He's like, hey, they got a lot of people following him. If I follow him, I'll have a lot of people. So he got some influence people, you know, wanted to kind of ride the coattails. He had other people who see him as an investment. They're like, you know what, if I get in on the ground floor with Absalom, when he becomes king, I'll get something out of this, right? There's a lot to gain in following Absalom. So he's got a big crowd of people around him. But there's this one guy in this story who it just doesn't make a ton of sense. He didn't follow Absalom because he was good looking. He didn't follow Absalom because he had good influence. He didn't follow Absalom because he had money or resources. He followed Absalom for a reason that just deeply hurt David. Here's this guy's name, and I got to look at it because I can never remember what his name is. And his name is Ahithoph. So does that sound like Ahith? I don't know. You got me. Ophel. Ahithopel. Seriously, your parents hate you if they name you whatever that word is, okay? So whoever his parents were that didn't like him, they named him that name, and I don't know what you want to call him. You can call him, I don't know. Just call him that guy, okay? But this guy, he betrays David, and it doesn't say why, but it can't be because he needs resources because he's already one of David's closest buddies. Like he's got David's ear. He's one of David's closest friends. It can't be because he wants influence. He is the king's closest counselor. It can't be because he wants to invest in his son and kind of watch Absalom rise to power and then be kind of one of the power brokers because he's already the power broker. So what's the deal is there's no personal gain. There's just this sense of deep betrayal. You know, maybe you felt that way. Maybe at some point in your life, somebody who took the trust they had and you're like, listen, what you had was fine, but you bailed on that and leveraged it for something we don't understand and then hurt me in the process. And you felt deeply pained, right? Maybe you've gone through it and you're like, man, that is a deep, terrible pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. And there's a part of your stomach that just kind of churns at the idea, even if it's an old wound. That was maybe years ago. And you still feel this anxiousness and anger deep inside of you. Somebody didn't have anything to gain. They just hurt you because they were being a jerk for some reason, you know? And there was just this problem that just rose up and they just used it to hurt you and you can't see a benefit from it. You don't see what it served them. You don't understand the story. But here's the thing. I wish that I could offer you a 20-minute kind of talk here and just kind of land a plane, tell you to do a couple things and it'll be all better. But the truth is it probably won't. But I can tell you where to find healing in this process. And it becomes something, even when I say this, is going to sound kind of like silly almost. I mean, you're going to be okay with it because we're at church, you know, and we say things at church that are silly sounding, you know. Like I'm going to tell you that the real solution to you finding hope in the middle of this terrible heartache is to cry out to God. But I know what you're thinking, right? You're like, okay, I'll let you get away with that because it's church, right? I expect you to say cry out to God, and I've tried to pray about it, you know. You know, you've said, oh, Lord, I'm just tired of this, and it hurts, and go on about your life, right? Or you've said a cute little prayer, maybe something, you know, God grant me the serenity to we do CR every week, and I can't remember it. But you get the idea, like to handle the things that can change and know the difference and all that stuff. And I'll think of it later when it doesn't matter. So, but the thing is that we have this kind of like quaint little cute idea of calling out to God. Like it's just something we say, like, oh yeah, I did that and it didn't work. And my guess is if you're a follower of Jesus and you have gone through something that's bitter and heartbreaking, some sort of betrayal, that my guess is at some point you've cried out to God in that kind of way. You're like, yeah, I tried that and I just didn't get much better. I tried and it didn't work. But what we see David do when he's betrayed by Absalom and then betrayed by the guy with the weird name, all of a sudden he comes to God in a unbelievable way. Now listen, I am not an artist, right? I am not that kind of deep, introspective person. My approach to life is like my golf game and my bowling game. We talked about it last week. It's blunt force trauma, okay? Like I get next to the golf ball with a golf club and I swing it as hard as humanly possible, right? I grunt, and after 9 holes of golf, my hands have blisters, right? Because I'm holding it like a baseball bat, And sometimes when I hit the ball, it goes a million miles, sometimes the right direction even. And but sometimes it doesn't go anywhere. It goes all over the place. But here's the thing, I don't have this kind of art, right? Where you have this deep expression of things. I'm the kind of guy who comes up with, this sucks. I don't like it, right? So I need somebody to help me kind of unearth the feelings that we go through because they're all there. I just don't always have words for them because I'm being blunt and I'm being honest and raw. But when David goes through this, he expresses heartfelt pain that I feel that I just don't have words for. And he starts it in chapter 55, and he's praying out to God. He's not like saying a cute prayer, something you fit on a coffee cup. He's pouring out the depths of his soul. And he starts like this: listen to my prayer, O God. Do not ignore my cry for help. Please listen and answer me. Man, you can just feel it. It's not like, hey, dear Lord. He's like, please, God, listen to my prayer. Don't ignore me. I need this, If we're going to cry out to God, it has to be deeper than just this kind of cute little prayer. We have to acknowledge our need for an advocate. We were designed by God to need people to advocate for us. And when he felt betrayed, when we feel betrayed, we feel like we've lost someone who is supposed to be on our side, right? You had this person clearly marked out on your side of the equation, and they switched teams, and they're looking at you and you feel like, man, there's a giant advocate position that's missing. When we cry out to God, we have to tell God, I need you on my side. I need you, and I want to cry out to you and acknowledge my need for an advocate and somebody to stay on my side, somebody that I can trust. Beginning parts of how we're scratching into the surface. When we feel betrayed by somebody, our natural tension is to go after them and beg them to come back, or to go after them and try to kill them, right? That's our normal kind of deal, is we go after them and want that position filled, or we go after them and vindicate. And that's where the story kind of goes. David begins to express this power, this thing that's going on inside of him that just is churning up in a way that really only he can. He says this in verse 4, my heart pounds in my chest, the terror of death assault me. Fear and trembling overwhelm me, and I cannot stop shaking. Oh, that I had wings of a dove, that I would fly away and rest. I would fly far away to the quiet of the wilderness. He says this in verse 8, it's not on the screen, how quickly I would escape far from this wild storm of hatred. If you've ever been betrayed, to whatever degree, it might be a small degree or a huge degree, right? Whatever, you feel embarrassed by it. It's the weirdest thing. You didn't do anything wrong in the process. But in the process, you feel deeply betrayed. And when you feel betrayed, you feel like you share the blame. It's not true. But you feel like you're the one to blame for it. And you're embarrassed by it. You're embarrassed by what's happened. Whatever happened from the outside feels like you're at fault and you've got something to explain, and it makes us want to run and hide. I mean, that's what David says. I mean, David's like, man, if I just had the wings of a dove, I could fly away and rest. If you've ever gone through betrayal, you know what this feels like. You know what it feels like to feel deeply despair and exhausted from it. and just want to rest and not have judgment, not have fear, not have anxiety about it. And that's David's story. He's playing this out, and he's telling us what it feels like to go through it. He wanted to run. He wanted to hide. He wanted to get away. If you've ever been betrayed, you know what that feels like. You feel like, how can I face those people? Think about David's position. I mean, it was one thing when his son ran away and the people who would benefit from it, and you can kind of expect that. And David's probably like, oh, that kid, I could kill him, and then he's rolling his eyes at the people that he's amassing. But when his close friend bails on him, can you imagine? He's like, how can I possibly face this kingdom again? As I stand up here, they're all going to be like, oh, yeah, he's the guy who lost his closest counselor to his son. That's goofy. It doesn't seem like, maybe if his closest friends aren't following him, maybe I shouldn't follow him. Do you see what's going on? And he's like, I just want to get away from it all. If you've ever experienced betrayal from a boss, a friend, a partner in life, somebody that you love and trusted, somebody that you invested in, and they've used it to hurt you, then you know what it feels like. You just want to run and hide. You don't ever want to see people again. You start a whole new life. So we have to acknowledge that we want to run. When we're crying out to God, we're not just saying this cute little prayer that's like, oh, Jesus, bless me, keep me, help me, whatever, and just being real simple about it. You're expressing, the crying out comes from our gut. It's visceral. It's something that just comes out of us in a deep and powerful way, because we have to be able to tell God the truth of what's going on. If we really want hope and healing, it's not going to come on the surface. It's going to come out of the depths. The story goes on later on, it says this in verse 9. Confuse them, Lord, and frustrate their plans. For I see violence and conflict in the city. Its walls are patrolled day and night against invaders, but the real danger and wickedness is within the city. Do you see what he's saying? He's like, these wicked people. He's acknowledging to God that he has there's like these terrible pieces of him. He's like, I want to confuse them. I want to thwart them. I want to hurt them. I want to take this out on them. I want to vindicate what has been right, what has been made wrong. I want to make it right. Isn't that what he's saying? He's ultimately just going after him and saying, listen, I see all the wrong, and I want to point out who's wrong. I want to point out their wickedness. I want to point out what they've done, and I want to make it right. That's the problem, isn't it? When we're hurt, we find out really quickly who we're wired to be. And you see both sides of it. I mean, most of the sociologists and psychologists will tell us that we're probably one of two people when we experience conflict. We're either fight or flight people. We're either the people who rise up, bow up big, and go face to face and fight, or the people who kind of want to run away. And it proves to us when we're betrayed that the truth is we're probably both at some extent. Like in the first couple of verses, you hear David going, I just want to run away. He wants to fly out, right? But then in this next couple of verses, he's saying, but I also want to stay and fight this out. I want everybody to know the truth. We see both sides of what's going on. There's a little bit of us that wants to run and hide, but the other part of us wants to run and hide, run and put ourselves in hiding so that we can jump out and lash out in vindication. When we begin this process of really crying out to God, notice that David doesn't pull his punches. He's honest about what he thinks. He tells God every piece of this broken story that just plays out in his life. Some of the most beautiful and profound and powerful prayers that I've ever heard come out of people's mouths have had cuss words all through them because they're honest and real. God can handle your pain. God can handle your frustration. God can handle your anger. He's a big boy. He can take it. But the problem is we kind of pull back and go, I'm not supposed to feel that way, so I can't be honest with him. I can't do this and tell him I want to run. I can't tell him that I want to lash out in anger. I can't tell him that I think that person is wicked. I can't tell him. You feel like that, right? You feel like you can't be honest with the God who is all-knowing. Where do you think that comes from? Where do you think it comes from that we feel like we can't be honest with the God who already knows how we feel? That obviously comes from the enemy, who's trying his very best to keep us from being real and honest and ultimately trusting God, the one who will never leave us, never forsake us, never betray us. We can have full confidence in him. We pour out our heart. This isn't a cry out to God in some cute way. This isn't a coffee cup. This is an act of of need in our lives where we cry out to God and express this crappy pain. And God, this sucks and I don't like it. And I want to run and hide. I want to lash out in anger. I want to be vindicated. But we have to, when we cry out to God, release vindication to God. That's hard to do, isn't it? Because when we let somebody, like we say, hey, I'm going to release vindication from God, there's a little bit of it that feels like we're letting them off the hook. We feel like, man, that person hurt me deeply in this affair. We feel like if I release vindication to God, doesn't it feel a little bit like you're telling them it's okay? It's hard to do. What about when you're at work, and your boss does something and they betray you? In a meeting, you thought one thing, then you thought they were on your side, the next thing you know, you hear them talking bad about you. It feels like if you release vindication from God to God that you're kind of just saying it's okay, and it's not okay. Doesn't it feel that way? But here's the thing. You see this huge welling up of frustration and anger and bitterness in you. And you feel like if you lashed out at them, it would feel better, doesn't it? And it would for about 15 seconds. But as soon as you lash out and you pour it out, you just make more. Here's one of the things that I frustrate with sometimes as a counselor. And I don't do a lot of counseling. Those of you who know me well enough to really know me well, I'm not very gentle. I'm not good at that. I'm like, okay, you're dumb. That's what I got for you. But the thing is that we go through this. Sometimes I'll struggle with it because I want to make sure before I meet with somebody that they're ready to listen. Because I'll meet with people, and sometimes if they're not ready to hear what I have to say or what like some advice or some biblical counsel in this thing, they're just really hurting. So they'll come in the office and they'll just pour everything out on the desk. Now I get to hold all their mess, and they feel a ton better for a second. But then they go out to the car and they make more mess. So now I'm holding their old mess. They got new mess to carry. So now we both got this mess. I'm like, this isn't working. What we want to do is pour out that pain and let God begin to heal it. And that's really what is happening. Like, that's really what's going on. There's this piece in it where God's saying, listen, when you pour it out and you release vindication to me and let me worry about what's going to happen, how this person's going to be vindicated, how everybody's going to know it, how it's all going to be made right. When you release vindication to God, it allows him to begin to work in your life. The problem is when you tell God he can do it and then you go do it too. That's when we live in bitterness and we get stuck with this reciprocal kind of product in our life where we just churn over and over in our brokenness, and we wind up spewing it out everywhere around us. When we're in that place where we're just broken and everything's kind of caving in around us, we feel like it's hopeless. It feels like a death sentence, doesn't it? When you've been betrayed by somebody, you feel like, man, that's not great, right? You feel like it's not just great for a couple of days. You feel like the whole world is falling apart. And I love David's words here in verse 11. It says this about everything that he's experienced. It says, everything is falling apart. Threats and cheating are rampant in the streets. He's not just seeing this. Now, get it. One person betrayed him. One guy. His kid had a bunch of people follow him, and then one guy leaves, and he's like, everything's falling apart. It's terrible. Now, we assume, like when we read it, we're like, well, everything must have been falling apart. But doesn't that feel a lot like how we feel when we've been betrayed? Like it's all bad? Like we have a tendency to go, like, I got hurt at church, and trust me, over the years, we've been hurt at church. Doesn't it feel like, well, all Christians are losers? But that's not true. That's not how it really is in our lives. It's just how it feels. Like everything's falling apart. And you feel that way. When you've been betrayed in a relationship, don't you feel like all men or all women are out for this? They're always going to hurt me? Doesn't it feel like that when you go to work and you're like, all bosses are jerks and they can't be trusted? Because that's how it feels. Like everything is falling apart. And doesn't it feel hopeless? Doesn't it feel like I'm never, ever going to be able to recover from this? Express that to God. That's what crying out to God is. Crying out to God is expressing your fear about the future, knowing that it may or may not be true, right? You may, God, I just don't see how I can ever trust somebody again. I don't see how I can ever go through this again. And when we begin to pour that out, the problem is, the challenge is not to replace it. Pour it out to God and leave ourselves empty and waiting for him to fill us back up. That's the story, isn't it? It's not just pouring it out and then making more and pouring it out, because that's what we do all the time, right? We don't really go to God with our pain, and so we go to our friends, right? And we just pour it out. We just kind of throw up all over them. And then they're covered in the mess, right? And we're like, okay, they really can't offer me any help. And so we go back and we make some more pain, and we take it over here and we throw it up all over this person. And then we go back and we make some more pain and we throw it up all over that person. You know what happens when you do that for a month or two? All your friends go, whew, I'm good, dude. You know, I'm gonna need to create some space, because being around you is toxic, because you're just throwing up all this stuff all over me. Isn't that the challenge that we have to deal with? Is pouring it out to God allows him to step in and begin to heal that. It's what Isaiah said was the purpose in sending the Messiah. He wanted to heal the brokenhearted and set the captive free. He wants to set us free, you and me. He wants to set us free from our bitterness and our hatred and all this mess that's inside of us. When we've been betrayed, and we all have, he knows that it sucks. And he steps in and begins to heal us from that bitterness, so that instead of pouring it out and making more, he can begin to heal the process and the parts of our brokenness in our heart. Look at what verse 16 says, because you got to get where David comes from. All this mess is happening, right? He's telling God, I hate this place. I want to run and hide. I want to lash out at him. I want this. I want that. He wants all this vindication. But then in verse 16, he says this, but I will call on God, and the Lord will rescue me. Morning, noon, and night, I cry out in my distress. This isn't just a prayer. It's not just a cute little one-time thing. Morning, noon, and night, over and over and over and over and over again, until he has a chance to step in and provide this healing. Can we get to this place? Morning, noon, and night, I cry out in my distress, and the Lord hears my voice. Isn't that what we really want? Don't you just, when you're going through something like that, don't you just really want somebody to hear your voice, just to listen to you? The Lord hears my voice. He ransoms me and keeps me safe from the battle waged against me. Though many will still oppose me, God, who has ruled forever, will hear me and humble them. For my enemies refuse to change their ways. They do not fear God. What's happened? We went from I want to run and hide, I want to thwart their plans, I want to go get them, to all this mess that's going on, all this anxious and anger and bitterness, to he trusts God with it. How is it that we go from crying out to God to finding healing from God? It's letting God purify our pain. God knows pain. I mean, he sent his only son for us. And Romans 5:8 says that he gave his son for us, and that his son demonstrated his love for us, and that while we were still sinning against him, he died for us. He knows pain, right? So letting God purify our pain is what allows us. We empty ourselves, and as we do, we'll begin to make more. But as we empty it, we let him step in and begin to heal. And after a while, morning, noon, and night of crying out, there'll be some healing, and then we have an opportunity. This is the best part. Because the problem is, when we get betrayed, what do we want to do? We want to run to our friends, right? And we go over to this person and we're like, hey, this is what happened, this is what happened. And what do? They're like, yeah, you shouldn't put up with that crap, and you should go do this, and you should fix that, and you should do this, right? And then we get madder. We go over here to this friend and we're like, this is what happened. He did this and she did that, and then they said this, and this is what happened. And they're like, no, you shouldn't put up with that, and you just get worse and worse and worse, right? But when we go to God first and we pour it out and let him begin to heal us, and we cry out morning, noon, and night, and we tell God what's really going on, and we express it, and we let him purify our pain, then we have a chance to go and see people, and we have a chance to choose community over someone who just agrees with us. Choosing community over just being affirmed. And that's hard to do, isn't it? It's hard to find healing in Jesus and community from friends. Because what we really want at that first feeling of want is affirmation. We want somebody to go, yeah, you're right. That person was wrong. You're worth more than that. You deserve better than that. We want somebody to stand up for us, and we need that advocate. But if we don't run to God and tell him we need an advocate and let him be our advocate, then we struggle, because we're always looking just for affirmation. But once we've experienced some level of honesty and some level of healing with God, then when we can run to our friends who we trust, and they can say words that hurt us and challenge us. I mean, that's often the case. I get to sit down with people and I'll tell them something they don't necessarily want to hear. And it's not always easy, but I love the words of Proverbs 27:6. It says, the faithful are the wounds of a friend, but profuse are the kisses of an enemy. I mean, he's like, listen, friends who will tell you the truth are few, but there are tons of people who will tell you what you want to hear. Friends will tell you the truth, but the people who will tell you what you want to hear, there's tons of those things. There are people who just kind of go, look, I'll just tell you what you want to hear. I'll stand up on your side. But the truth is that we can't hear the wounds of a friend when we're trying to get an advocate. We're just looking for somebody to just agree with us. So we find healing in our cry out to God, and then we can run and find some sort of level of community and support and love in the midst of our deep pain. I love this piece of it, because when we go to people and we pour out our hearts, if it hasn't been something that we walk with God in, then all we wind up is just throwing up all over people. Ephesians chapter 4 says this verse about communication. It says, don't let corrupt communication come out of your mouth, but only what is valuable, right? Only what is good for building up and fits the occasion. Listen, that's kind of a weird thing. Like, one of the translations says, don't let foul language come out of your mouth. And we have a tendency to assume, okay, he's talking about cuss words, and he's not. What he's talking about is things that undermine stuff. What he's talking about is things that don't encourage. When we're existing in our pain, when we talk to people, it's very, very difficult to say words that build people up and don't tear them down. More times than not, what we wind up doing is when we're living in our unpurified pain, we go and talk to people and we just pour out, and all we do is talk that person down, those people. We make assumptions that are wild and ridiculous, and we wind up hurting people deeply. But when we are living in a purified pain, we call it to God, let him in, let him heal those broken places. And so we've got good friends who will tell us the truth. Then when we talk about those people or what's going on, we're a lot less likely to make wild assumptions. We're a lot less likely to lash out in pain. You know, when we talk about bitterness and we talk about betrayal and we talk about pain, what I love is that the real advocate that God is, he's no stranger to it. He's no stranger to betrayal. Like, you know, you want somebody who's been there, you know, and that's what we commonly look for. We commonly look for a friend who they've been there before. They'll have good advice. They've been there before. They'll have good advice. They've been through that before. They've dealt with this kind of pain. And that may be good as long as you come to it with kind of a pure heart in the deal. But here's the best part. When we cry out to God and we tell him I need an advocate, he stands by us as one who understands betrayal at the deepest level. And when Paul, who's, was no stranger to betraying Jesus, he's one who lived his life to push against Christians. When Paul tells the story of how he was told about what we do every single week at Journey. We do communion every week at Journey. At some point during our service, you're going to hold in your hand a little cup and a little piece of bread. And it represents for us the body and the blood of Jesus. And when Paul tells the story in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, I love how he tells this. I got to flip over to 1 Corinthians because this Bible wasn't opened right. But when he does that in 1 Corinthians 11, he says this about, in verse 23. Paul's telling the story of what Jesus told him. So he's passing it on. He says this in verse 23. He says, "For I pass on to you what I received from the Lord himself." Jesus told it to me this way. And he says this, "On the night that he was betrayed." I mean, isn't that powerful? I mean, to know that Paul's like, man, I spent my whole life betraying Jesus. But on the night he was betrayed by the one that was closest to him. Can you imagine how hard it was for Jesus to know all along, the very first time he shook Judas's hand, this is the one that's going to betray me? You know, the night when everybody was asking, where's Judas? And he knew that Judas was off making a deal to sell Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. Could you imagine how hard it was to be Jesus, knowing that when he walked into that upper room that night and he saw those men and he got out a little towel and a basin and knelt down and washed their feet, that when he held Judas' feet, he knew that Judas was going to betray him. And when he served him bread and he broke it. And he said these words. He says, on the night that he was betrayed, the Lord himself took bread. I'm adding this. He gave it to Judas, and he gave thanks for it. And then he broke it into pieces and said, this is my body, Judas, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And in the same way, he took the cup and the wine after supper, and he said, this cup, Judas, is the new covenant between me and you, between God and his people, in an agreement confirmed with my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. You know, when we ask for an advocate, we ask for somebody who comes alongside of us and puts their arm around us and cares deeply about what we're going through. I want you to know something. I think Jesus puts his arm around us and say, betrayal sucks, doesn't it? It's terrible to go through. I've been there. I love knowing that we have an advocate who's been there. So here's the thing. In a minute after we sing this song, the tray is going to come by and you're going to have a little piece of bread and a little cup of juice. If you're a follower of Jesus, and just take one of those and know that you have an advocate who knows what the deep-rooted betrayal looks like. He knows what the pain's like. He knows that he wants to run. He knows what it feels like to want to hide. He knows what it feels like to want to lash out in anger. But he was purified in his pain. But if that trait comes to you and you're not a follower of Jesus, maybe you're at a place in your life where this whole faith name's arm's length, or maybe you're at a place where you're like, I was a follower of Jesus and then I got hurt deeply by people in the church and I hate it and I don't want to talk about it anymore. And I want you to know something. When that gets to you, if faith's an arm's distance for you, it's okay with us. If you just hand that tray to the person next to you, nobody in this room wants you to pretend to be something you're not. We're thrilled that you're a part of today. And so when that tray comes to you, just hand it to the person next to you. You can be confident that it's okay to belong here long before you believe the way we believe. We're thrilled you're here. Maybe just take a minute and think about something we've talked about or been singing about this morning, and we'll wrap things up together as a family. Let's stand and sing this.